Christopher Plummer and Julie Andrews created one of the most beloved on-screen romances in film history in The Sound of Music, a movie that became a global classic and defined generations. But behind the sweeping music, iconic scenes, and unforgettable chemistry, something far less harmonious was unfolding off-camera. Years later, Plummer shocked fans when he admitted that his experience on set was far from the fairy tale audiences remember. He even went as far as jokingly calling the film The Sound of Mucus, and later confessed he was drinking during the filming of one of its most iconic moments. So what really happened behind the scenes between him and Julie Andrews? To understand that, we have to go back to the film itself. Released in 1965, The Sound of Music was directed by Robert Wise and starred Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer in the lead roles, alongside Richard Haydn, Peggy Wood, and Eleanor Parker. Based on the memoir The Story of the Trapp Family Singers, it tells the dramatized story of Maria von Trapp, a governess who changes the lives of 7 children and eventually marries their father, Captain Georg von Trapp, before the family flees Austria during the Anschluss in 1938. Filming took place across Salzburg and Los Angeles between March and September of 1964. When the movie was first released, critics were divided, but audiences were not. Within weeks, it climbed to #1 at the box office and eventually became the highest-grossing film of 1965. Its success was so massive that by 1966, it surpassed Gone with the Wind as the most successful film in history at the time, holding that record for 5 years and breaking box office records in nearly 30 countries. Over the decades, its legacy only grew. The film earned 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director, along with major Golden Globe wins and recognition from the American Film Institute and the Library of Congress, which preserved it as culturally and historically significant. In The Sound of Music, audiences were presented with a beautifully simplified version of the Von Trapp family's story, one filled with romance, courage, and a dramatic escape across the mountains. But the real history behind Maria von Trapp and her family was far more complicated than what appeared on screen. In the film, Maria, played by Julie Andrews, is portrayed as a young nun in training who becomes a governess for Captain Georg von Trapp's 7 children. Over time, she falls deeply in love with the widowed captain, and their bond grows into a joyful marriage that saves the family from a dark political future. It's a sweeping love story that became one of cinema's most enduring romances. But in real life, Maria's feelings developed very differently. In her memoir, she revealed that she was never instantly or passionately in love with Georg von Trapp. Instead, she admitted she initially married him because of her deep affection for his children. Only later did love grow between them. In her own words, she eventually came to love him deeply, but not in the immediate fairy tale way the film suggests. The differences don't stop there. In the movie, the oldest Von Trapp child is Liesel, a teenage girl who experiences a romantic storyline with a German messenger. However, the real Von Trapp family's eldest child was actually a boy named Rupert. The character of Liesel was created for dramatic effect. When the film was released, Rupert was already an adult living in Vermont and working as a doctor. He would often tell people he was part of the real Von Trapp family, though many simply didn't believe him. Behind the scenes of the film, there were also persistent rumors involving Christopher Plummer and Charmian Carr, who played Liesel. Some accounts suggested the two shared a brief off-screen connection, despite Plummer being married at the time and the significant age gap between them. However, neither was ever seen publicly confirming a romantic relationship. Years later, Carr addressed the speculation on television, admitting she had a youthful admiration and crush on Plummer, but firmly denying anything physical had ever occurred. Carr herself also had her own hidden struggles during filming. Although she appeared graceful in the famous 16 going on 17 sequence, she was not a trained dancer. In fact, she reportedly sustained a minor ankle injury during rehearsal, which was carefully managed during production. Even so, many fans were surprised to later learn how little formal dance experience she actually had. Even the family's famous escape from Austria was changed for dramatic purposes. In the film, the Von Trapps flee through the mountains on foot, climbing into Switzerland to escape the Nazis. In reality, Maria von Trapp later clarified that the family did not hike across the Alps at all. Instead, they left Austria by train and traveled into Italy. This was possible because Captain Georg von Trapp had been born in Zadar, which had become part of Italy after World War I, granting the family Italian citizenship. The Sound of Music was inspired by Maria von Trapp's memoir, The Story of the Trapp Family Singers, but her real-life connection to the film was far more complicated than audiences might expect. Despite being the source of the story, Maria von Trapp was not invited to the film's premiere, a decision that surprised many, especially since she had briefly appeared in the production. She was invited to the Broadway version's premiere, but reportedly told there was no room at the film event, with seats reserved for celebrities. For many, it felt like an ironic exclusion of the very person who made the story possible. On screen, Maria is portrayed as an almost angelic figure who transforms a strict military household and softens Captain von Trapp into a loving father. In reality, the family dynamic was much more grounded. Maria was deeply involved in managing the household and finances, and Georg von Trapp was not the cold disciplinarian shown in the film, but rather a gentle musical father. The more dramatic portrayal was created for storytelling purposes, but it didn't fully reflect the real family. Maria's early life was also very different from the film. Orphaned young in Vienna and raised by a strict uncle, she eventually found her way to religion after a life-changing moment in church. She later joined the Benedictine Abbey in Salzburg before being sent to the von Trapp household as a governess. Although the film shows 7 children, the real family had 10. Maria did not instantly become a mother figure to all of them, but over time she built strong bonds with each child and became an essential part of their lives. Her relationship with Georg also developed more slowly than the film suggests. She initially felt no romantic love for him, only affection for the children. She later agreed to his proposal after encouragement from the nuns, and their marriage in 1927 grew into love over time. The family's musical story was also simplified for the screen. The children were already musically trained when Maria arrived, and while Georg was cautious about public performances, he eventually supported their singing after their success at the 1936 Salzburg Music Festival. During the Great Depression, financial hardship pushed Maria to take on a more active role, managing the household, reducing expenses, and eventually helping turn their singing into a way to support the family. As the von Trapp family's reputation grew, their situation in Austria became increasingly complicated. The German authorities reportedly saw value in keeping them in the country for propaganda purposes. Georg von Trapp was even offered a return to naval service, while his son Rupert was presented with a professional opportunity as a doctor. Despite these tempting offers, Georg made the decision to leave Austria with his family rather than cooperate with a system he did not support. Unlike the dramatic escape shown in The Sound of Music, the real family did not cross the Alps on foot. They left Austria by train, traveling into Italy before eventually making their way to the United States. Their early time in America was not without difficulty. Although they were initially granted temporary visas, the family later returned to Europe when those expired and toured Scandinavia to avoid traveling through German-controlled regions. When they later re-entered the U.S., they were briefly held at Ellis Island due to confusion over their immigration status. After a short delay, the situation was resolved and they were allowed to continue their tour. Long before filming began, casting for The Sound of Music went through many possibilities. Julie Andrews ultimately became Maria, but actresses like Audrey Hepburn, Doris Day, Shirley Jones, and Anne Bancroft were all considered. For Captain von Trapp, names such as Sean Connery and Yul Brynner were also discussed before Christopher Plummer was chosen. Today, it is hard to imagine anyone else in those roles. Even the children's casting had surprises. A young Richard Dreyfuss auditioned for Friedrich von Trapp and impressed producers, but his lack of dance ability cost him the role, which went to Nicholas Hammond instead. Behind the scenes, Christopher Plummer's experience was complicated. He later admitted to struggling with alcohol during filming, and some cast members recalled his off-screen behavior affecting production at times. Despite this, his performance remained one of the most memorable aspects of the film. Plummer himself was born in Toronto in 1929 and initially trained as a concert pianist before turning to acting after being inspired by Laurence Olivier's Henry V. He went on to build an extraordinary career in theater, film, and television, earning some of the industry's highest honors over 7 decades. He won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for Beginners in 2011, and was previously nominated for The Last Station in 2009 and All the Money in the World in 2017. His long filmography also included standout roles in The Return of the Pink Panther, Somewhere in Time, Malcolm X, The Insider, A Beautiful Mind, Syriana, Inside Man, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and Knives Out. Despite his success, Plummer's personal life was marked by 3 marriages. His first was to actress Tammy Grimes in 1956, which lasted 4 years and produced his only child, actress Amanda Plummer. His second marriage was to journalist Patricia Lewis, whose life was dramatically affected after a serious car accident outside Buckingham Palace that left her in a coma for weeks. The couple married in 1962 after her recovery, but divorced 5 years later. In 1970, he married actress Elaine Taylor, with whom he spent the rest of his life in Weston, Connecticut. He had no children from his second or third marriages. Plummer also shared his thoughts openly about The Sound of Music later in life. Although the film became one of the most beloved musicals in history, he never fully embraced it. He once joked that he called it the sound of mucus, a remark that reflected his long-standing frustration with the project. In interviews, he admitted he found the role of Captain Von Trapp emotionally limited, describing it as difficult to bring depth or humor to a character he saw as one-dimensional. Over time, he referred to the script as overly sentimental, though he eventually acknowledged the film's enormous cultural impact, even if it never became a personal favorite. Julie Andrews, his co-star in the film, led a life that was equally shaped by both extraordinary success and personal hardship. Born Julia Elizabeth Wells on October 1, 1935, in Surrey, England, she grew up during a turbulent family history that included separation, remarriage, and wartime hardship. Her biological father left early in her life, and she was raised largely by her mother and stepfather, Ted Andrews, whom she later described as both influential and deeply complicated in her upbringing. Her early years were marked by poverty during World War II, and she later spoke openly about the emotional and physical difficulties she experienced growing up in London during that time. As Barbara and Ted Andrews built their stage careers, the family's financial situation slowly improved. They moved to Beckenham and later returned to Hersham after the war, settling at the Old Mews in West Grove, a home with its own quiet history, as Julie's maternal grandmother had once worked there as a maid. Seeing her talent early, Ted invested heavily in Julie's training. She attended the Cohn-Ripman School, now Tring Park School for the Performing Arts, and later studied voice under the acclaimed soprano Madame Lillian Stiles Allen. Julie affectionately called her my third mother, saying, "I've got more mothers and fathers than anyone in the world." Stiles Allen, in turn, praised her rare gift of absolute pitch. Julie, however, remained modest, later saying in her memoir Home, "Madame was sure I could do Mozart and Rossini, but, to be honest, I never was." She described her voice as very pure, with a 4-octave range, and finished her schooling at Woodbrook School in Beckenham. From there, Julie Andrews went on to one of the most extraordinary careers in entertainment history, spanning over 80 years. She earned an Academy Award, BAFTA, Emmys, Grammys, Golden Globes, and numerous lifetime honors, including a damehood in 2000. She began in the West End in 1948, made her Broadway debut in The Boyfriend in 1954, and rose to fame with My Fair Lady, Camelot, and the televised Cinderella. Her film breakthrough came with Mary Poppins, 1964, followed by The Sound of Music, 1965, which cemented her global stardom. In later years, she worked across film, voice acting, television, and writing, including Shrek, Despicable Me, and Bridgerton, while also publishing memoirs and children's books. Despite the success of The Sound of Music, behind the scenes, the experience wasn't always smooth. Christopher Plummer later admitted he initially struggled with Andrews' constant warmth, joking it felt like being hit over the head with a Valentine's Day card. He even called her Ms. Disney at the time. But over the years, Plummer softened his view, later praising her professionalism and talent. What began as tension eventually became lasting friendship, with both speaking fondly of each other long after the film became a classic.